The barn was burning again. Orange light bled through the dawn mist, licking up the splintered beams like a devil's tongue. Smoke rolled low and thick over the trampled earth, sweet with the stench of scorched leather and hay, and underneath it all something bitterer. Gunpowder, sweat, blood that hadn't cooled yet. Caleb Holt stood alone, shotgun still hot in his hands, barrel pointed at the ash-gray horizon as if daring it to deliver more death. The fire crackled behind him, but he didn't turn, didn't flinch. His coat was torn. A gash on his left arm had dried into a stiff patch of rust-colored cloth. His boots were soaked, not with water, the rains hadn't come in 3 seasons, but with mud and memory. A crow circled low overhead, just one. He could hear the faint scrape of hoofbeats from the far hill fading, the last of Cain's men riding off like shadows before sunrise. And, in the silence that followed, broken only by the occasional groan of timber giving way, Caleb's mind drifted not forward, but back. Back to the smoke of another kind. Back to the card room at the Gilded Spur. Deadwood, summer of 2076. The saloon stank of sweat and desperation, same as it always did when the sun dropped and the games got cruel. Men pressed shoulder to shoulder, spilling whiskey and curses across cracked tables. A piano clanked somewhere near the bar, out of tune and out of place, drowning beneath the sound of coin and loss. Caleb sat at the far table beneath a tin lamp, its flame coughing through soot. He kept his hat low and his mouth shut, same as always. His right hand rested on the table, steady as stone, while the left hovered near the old Remington on his hip. 3 players had folded, 2 remained. One was Cain. Silas Cain didn't wear the usual gambler's grin. He was a rattlesnake in a waistcoat, quiet, dangerous, all flicked eyes and twitchy fingers. His mustache twitched every time he blinked. Across from him, Caleb felt the weight of years pressing down not Cain's but his own. Years wasted in dust and drought and silence with a woman who stopped calling his name. "You sure you want to do this, Holt?" Cain asked, voice slick as boot oil. "You're playing with more than land now." Caleb said nothing. The pot was already too deep for words. Cain flicked the final card onto the table. The queen of spades. A smile cracked his face. "Full house," he said. "Queens over jacks." The saloon murmured. A few stepped closer. Caleb didn't blink, just laid his hand down slow. 4 sevens, the table went still. Then Cain laughed the kind of sound a coffin makes when it splits in the ground. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. And then he waved his hand toward the corner. A girl stepped forward, no more than 14. Dust-caked boots, long brown coat, too big for her frame, and eyes like polished amber sharp ferrule, wrong for a child. She stared at Caleb like he was a cliff face, unmoved, unimpressed. Cain put a hand on her shoulder. "Smart little coyote, this one. Been running ledgers and secrets for me since she could walk, knows every name, every debt, every buried sin in this damn town." He leaned close. "And now she's yours." Caleb looked at her. She didn't flinch. He rose, tipping his hat once toward Cain, and turned to leave. The girl followed without being told. Outside, the sky was dark and the air smelled like trouble. Caleb lit a match with his boot and set fire to a cigarette he wouldn't finish. "You got a name?" he asked. The girl's voice was quiet but cold. "Mara." He nodded once. That was the last word they spoke for 3 days. Back in the present, the barn groaned and collapsed behind him in a rain of sparks. Mara was inside the ranch house, tending to Eliza's shoulder. Eliza had taken buckshot to the upper arm, but she'd held her ground. Caleb had seen her fire both barrels and reload faster than he remembered her ever doing. She hadn't screamed, not even once. He felt the wind shift. A change was coming, not just in the air, but in the way the land itself seemed to breathe, like it had been holding something in. A shape moved in the shadows beyond the corral. Amos, the prospector, limped toward him with his rifle over his shoulder and a half-empty flask swinging from his belt. The old man tipped his hat. "Storm's coming," Amos muttered, more to the land than to Caleb. Caleb didn't answer, just watched the horizon as if it owed him something. And maybe it did, because something had changed in the girl's eyes during the fight. Something Caleb couldn't name, but it rattled him worse than Cain ever had. She wasn't running anymore, she was building something. And it wasn't his ranch she was saving, it was something older, wilder, and more real. He lowered his shotgun. The fire was dying now, but the fight wasn't done, not by a damn sight. The first thing Eliza Holt saw was the girl's eyes yellow-brown, wide-set, unblinking, like a coyote caught between hunger and the rifle's aim. They stared at each other across the porch, neither moving. Eliza didn't speak, just wiped her hands on her apron and stepped aside. Caleb said nothing either. He gave Eliza a nod not of love or greeting, but of inevitability. Then he walked past her, boots thudding slow on the warped planks, and disappeared into the house. The girl stayed outside. Dust clung to her coat like a second skin. Her boots were cracked, one heel loose. A small leather satchel hung at her side, worn slick with time. She didn't fidget, didn't shuffle. Just stood there in the dying sun like she belonged nowhere and knew it. Eliza folded her arms. "What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. "Girl," Eliza tried again. "Pausa?" "Mara." That was all she said. The word landed like a stone in dry dirt, no echo, no reply. Pine Hollow sat low in the prairie, tucked between two ridgelines like a secret trying not to be found. The wind ran wild here. It swept through the canyon and over the pastures like something untamed, scattering grit into the bones of everything: fences, roofs, people. The ranch had once been something. Not rich, but proud. A line of fencing that held for years. A barn that stood straight even when the ground didn't, but drought was like rust. It didn't come with noise, just stayed and took bit by bit until even the cows stopped lowing. Inside, the house smelled of ash, sun-dried linens, and old paper. Eliza had once kept roses in a tin basin by the window, but the petals had turned to dust long ago. Now the basin was dry, the dirt cracked like her hands. She watched the girl from the kitchen window through a pane streaked with dust and age. Caleb sat in the corner with his boots off, scraping dried blood from his sleeve with the back of a knife. His shoulders sagged, not from the ride, from the years. "You bring her here for a reason?" Eliza asked without turning. Caleb kept scraping. One air. Elisa turned. "At cards?" He nodded once. "Dear God, she's more useful than a bag of coin," he said flatly. "Knows things." Eliza didn't ask what kind. She already had a guess, and it made her stomach tighten like old wire. The girl didn't carry herself like a child. There was no softness in her, just sharp edges. She'd seen too much and learned how to walk away from it without blinking. "She's not staying in the house," Eliza said. "She will," Caleb answered. Silence stretched between them, not like a wall, but a canyon, the kind you couldn't shout across. The sun had dropped low by the time Mara finally stepped inside. She didn't wait to be asked, just walked through the door and stood in the entry like a stray mutt testing a trap. Eliza pointed toward the wash basin. "Clean up. You smell like horses and worse." Mara obeyed, but not out of respect, more like strategy. She splashed water onto her face, scrubbing her hands like someone used to being watched. Later, Caleb led her to the loft above the stable. It was dry, had a cot, and didn't smell too much like manure. She nodded once and set down her satchel. He started to leave, then paused. "You run?" She looked at him through the dark. "You gonna chase me if I do?" Caleb didn't answer, just closed the door. That night, the wind howled low through the canyon. Mara lay on the cot staring at the rafters, her hands clasped behind her head. She didn't sleep much, didn't trust places that were quiet. Downstairs, Eliza turned in her bed, eyes wide in the dark. She hadn't asked what the girl knew, but she had seen the way Cain's men looked at Caleb when he walked into town, the nods too slow, the smiles too measured. Something passed between men like that, something dangerous. And now the girl was here, in her house, wearing silence like armor. Eliza's hand drifted beneath her pillow, touching the cold metal of the pistol she kept hidden there, not out of fear, just memory. Before dawn, Mara was already outside. She found the fence line broken in two places, repaired poorly with baling wire. She didn't ask, just started tying it back together. Her fingers moved fast, practiced. Caleb saw her from the porch and said nothing. At noon, she mucked the stalls. By evening, she'd located a busted wheel on the hay cart and half fixed it with a rock and nail. When Eliza passed by, Mara didn't speak, just kept working. The girl didn't smile, didn't rest, just moved quiet and fast, like someone who knew every minute might be her last safe one. At supper, they ate in silence. Wind scraped against the shutters. The lantern flickered with each gust. Caleb chewed slowly, staring at his plate. Eliza sipped her coffee and said nothing. Mara watched them both, not with fear, not even curiosity, just the cold detachment of someone measuring angles, exits, the weight of silence between words. "You know how to shoot?" Eliza asked suddenly. "Mara know it. Ever killed anything?" Another nod. "What?" Mara met her eyes. "Rat, dog, man." The table went still. Eliza set her coffee down, too slow. Caleb didn't move. Outside, a coyote howled long and low across the ridge. The fence post had been cut clean, not snapped, not rotted, sawn, Mara knelt beside it at first light, fingers tracing the smooth grain. The blade had been sharp, new, not ranch steel. The work of a man who didn't care if the herd wandered or if wolves came calling. She stood slowly, scanning the ridgeline. Nothing moved, but something had passed through the land in the dark. By midday, the sun beat down like a punishment. The earth cracked beneath boot soles. Every breath tasted of dust and dried pine. Heat shimmered over the horizon, blurring trees into ghosts. Caleb rode the fence line in silence, Mara walking beside him uninvited but not unwelcome. "You sleep at all?" he asked without looking. "I don't dream much," she said. He nodded once, slow. They kept moving. Inside the ranch house, Eliza watched them through the warped window pane. The glass distorted Mara's figure just enough to make her look older, taller, like a woman she hadn't raised. She'd taken to counting steps between glances, 5 steps between fence posts, 8 to the barn, 13 from porch to well. The kind of thing a woman did when silence stretched too long and the coffee didn't boil fast enough. That morning, she'd found one of her old ledgers disturbed, not missing, just opened, moved. A thin layer of dust wiped clean from a single page. Mara hadn't asked questions, but she'd seen where Eliza kept the key. That evening, all 3 sat at the dinner table for the first time. The lantern hissed low over the stew pot. No one spoke. The spoons clicked against metal bowls like distant hooves on stone. Caleb chewed slow, his eyes fixed on a knot in the table's grain, a scar from a carving knife 20 years back. Eliza sat across from him, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Mara ate without hesitation. No grace, no gluttony, just purpose. She placed her satchel on the floor beside her chair. Caleb noticed. Eliza did too. "You ever work a ranch?" Eliza asked finally. Mara wiped her mouth. "Worked worse." "That so?" "Worked a spur stable for 2 winters. Hauled whiskey to the upstairs rooms. Cleaned what came after." Eliza's lips tightened. Caleb's spoon stopped. Mara didn't blink. "Girl your age," Eliza said, voice like a steel rasp. "Ought to be somewhere with school books and clean sheets." "World don't hand out clean sheets," Mara replied. "You gotta take them or do without." Eliza's gaze lingered, but she didn't argue. The silence returned, thicker now, hotter. After supper, Caleb stepped out to the corral. The sun was dying behind the hills, casting red light over the horizon like spilled blood. He watched it drop for a while, arms crossed, one hand absently brushing the scar at his temple. He remembered the war, not the battles, but the in-betweens, nights crouched in brush, waiting for nothing. The sound of insects louder than any gun. The smell of a man bleeding slow, just out of reach. That was how this felt now. Something was coming, and like before, he didn't know which direction it'd come from or who'd bleed first. Inside, Eliza approached Mara's satchel while the girl was out washing her plate. She didn't rifle, just opened it. Carefully, inside, a rolled up scrap of oilskin, a slingshot, 2 river stones, a pocket Bible with blood on the binding, and a folded sheet of fine paper. The paper bore no writing, but Eliza recognized the watermark embossed from the Gilded Spur's private desk upstairs. She refolded it and set it back where it was. Mara stood in the doorway, dripping plate in hand, eyes narrow, no words spoken. Eliza dried her hands on her apron, beds ready. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the hearth with his old rifle, cleaning it for the second time in as many hours. The oil smelled sharp in the close air. He thought of the poker game again, of Kane's smile, not the gloating one after losing, but the brief flicker before the final card, as if he knew he was losing something more valuable than gold. The girl wasn't just a mouth to feed. She was leverage, memory, ammunition. Kane hadn't played to win that night. He'd played to rid himself of a threat. In the loft, Mara stared at the rafters again. This time, she whispered names. Names she couldn't forget. The man who beat her. The woman who covered it up. The boy who tried to help and paid with a tooth and a limp. Names etched into her mind like tally marks on a cell wall. She wasn't here to hide. She was here to see who Caleb really was and whether this place could burn Kane without burning her. Eliza lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling, fingers curled tight around the locket she never wore anymore. Inside it, a lock of hair, golden once, now faded to wheat. A child never born, a crib never built. She wondered not for the first time if she hated the girl because of what she was or because of what she might have been if things had gone another way. By dawn, none of them had spoken again. The table was set. 3 chairs, 3 bowls. But trust, like water in the hollow, was still hard to come by. Somewhere out past the fence line, a pair of boots left tracks where no man should have walked, and the earth swallowed them whole. The ledger page was folded into force, tucked behind a beam in the barn's loft. Mara found it by accident, or maybe not. Some part of her had always known Cain's secrets wouldn't stay buried. They were the kind that clung to your boots and your skin long after you left his walls. The paper was stiff from age but unburned, ink faded but legible in the slanted scrawl of a man who never expected to answer for anything. Names, amounts, timestamps, a schedule. One that stretched across counties, and Caleb's name was there, just once. Dated 2 years back, she stared at it a long time, breath shallow in the hay-scented stillness. Then she folded it again slower this time and slipped it into her satchel, behind the Bible and the stones. The wind outside shifted. It no longer whispered. It pressed against the boards like something trying to get in. The memory came uninvited. Deadwood, the back of the spur. She was 12, small for her age, fast with her hands. Silas Cain had sent her with a note to a man named Jessup, one of the railmen. He was already dead when she found him throat slit, boots still warm. She turned to run and saw another man walking away, long duster trailing behind, boots dragging like they carried more than weight. She never saw his face, but she remembered the sound his spurs made, not sharp, not proud, heavy, regretful. She remembered them again now and wondered if Caleb had ever worn spurs. That afternoon, Mara watched him from the porch. Caleb was working the pump with his sleeves rolled, face streaked with dust and sweat. He wasn't a cruel man, but he wasn't clean either. No one who survived this land was. Eliza stepped out behind her, drying her hands on a rag. "You gonna stare holes through him all day?" Mara didn't answer. Eliza stepped up beside her. "He didn't kill that man, if that's what's running through your mind." Mara turned. "You saw the name?" "I saw the paper. That don't mean guilt." "He was paid," Mara said quietly. $75 cash in the same week Jessup died. Eliza's jaw worked. So was half the damn town. Freight, horses, land, firewood. A man doesn't need to kill to owe. Mara looked back out over the pasture. A cow lowed in the distance, weak, tired. Even the animals had lost hope of rain. "I ain't accusing," she said. "Not yet." Later, she followed Caleb to the south pasture. He didn't acknowledge her, just handed her the reins of the mule cart and gestured toward the dry creek bed where the fence had fallen. They worked in silence. Wire stretched tight between leaning posts. Caleb drove a staple home with the back of his knife. "You remember everything?" he asked after a while. Mara's eyes narrowed. "Just the things that matter. What matters changes," he said. She didn't reply. Adusk amoserivet. He came from the canyon trail, his mule covered in burrs, his shirt damp from sweat and whiskey. Caleb met him at the gate. Something stirring in Deadwood, Amos rasped. "Cain's been sniffing. Sent 2 boys south, one toward Cheyenne, one staying close." "Looking for her? Or for what she might have carried out in her head?" Caleb glanced toward the barn. Amos followed his eyes and spat into the dirt. "If she remembers what I think she remembers, you best start counting bullets." That night, Mara opened the Bible again. Inside, she had copied a section from the old ledger long ago, just in case Cain ever made her disappear. It was in code, written between the lines of Psalms. Names turned into verses, amounts hidden in chapter numbers. Her own way of praying, once. Now, it was just insurance, but part of her wanted to burn it, wanted to stop remembering. She looked at her hands. Dirt under the nails, small cuts, splinters, hands that built things now. Not just ran. Eliza sat by the stove, sewing a torn blanket. She didn't look up when Mara entered. "You gonna ask?" Mara said. Eliza shook her head. "Not mine to ask. You'll tell what you want, when it matters." Mara stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she stepped forward and sat down beside her. Together, they stitched in silence the sound of thread sliding through fabric soft as a heartbeat. Outside, the moon rose cold over Pine Hollow. The ridgeline cast long shadows across the field. And beneath one of those shadows, a boot print waited fresh, pointed westward, toward the house. Not all ghosts come screaming. Some just walk the fence line, waiting for you to remember their face. The dog didn't bark. That was the first sign something was wrong. Old Bristle, half blind and deaf to most things, had slept on the porch every night for 7 years. But this morning, still dark, still breathless, he didn't make a sound. Just whimpered once, then went still. Mara felt it first. A shift in the air, not wind, pressure. She was up before the rooster crowed. Boots half-laced, rifle in hand, her breath came out slow, not fast, not fear instinct. In the silence, she heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple, slow and deliberate. Not the gallop of a traveler, not the casual trot of ranch folk. This was the sound of men coming who didn't want to be heard and had no reason to hurry. Caleb had been sitting by the hearth again, his rifle already clean, already loaded. He rose when Mara stepped in, her face pale and tight. "How many?" he asked. "6, maybe more." He didn't blink, just grabbed the shelves from the mantel and nodded toward the back window. "Elisa?" "In the kitchen. Get her to the ladder." Then the upstairs window. Mara moved without speaking. Eliza didn't argue. She saw Caleb's face and read it plain. The coffee was still on the stove, untouched, the steam curling like a ghost. She took the shotgun off the wall, checked the shells. Her hands didn't shake. "I'll cover the south side," she said, voice quiet. Caleb nodded. "Don't wait for the door to break." "I won't." Dawn cracked open with a red light that bled across the ridges like spilled guts. The barn stood quiet in the half-glow, smoke still curling from yesterday's branding. Mara took the loft. She lay prone, sights down, body steady. She could see them now. 7 men, dusty hats, long coats, spurs that didn't shine. They spread like oil across the field, slow, soaking into the dirt. The one in front rode a gray gelding and had a scar that split his cheek like a canyon. He wasn't Cain, but he was Cain's breed. "Leave the girl," the rider shouted. "You do that and we'll walk." No answer. "I ain't bluffing, Holt." Still no answer. Then the crack of a rifle. Maras. The bullet ripped through the brim of his hat, grazing his scalp. He jerked back, nearly fell, then howled. And just like that, the quiet shattered. Gunfire exploded across the yard. Bullets tore through the porch rail, smashed into the barn. One caught the trough and sent water spilling across the dirt. Eliza fired from the upstairs window. 2 shots deliberate, clean. One man went down, leg hit, screaming. Another tried to flank the east side. Amos got him. The old prospector stood behind a boulder, long rifle braced, eyes narrowed to slits. He didn't shout, just worked the bolt like it was his last day, and he meant to leave clean. Caleb moved through the smoke like a ghost, took the shotgun in both hands and leveled it at the man ducking near the hay cart. 1 shot. The man folded like wet canvas. The scar-faced rider dismounted and crawled behind the well. He shouted again. "She ain't worth it. She's dead already. Cain wants her back, not buried." Caleb moved behind the porch post. "She's mine now," he said. The rider laughed, bitter, ugly. "She was never yours. She was never anybody's. She knows things, Holt, things that'll get you killed." Another shot rang out, not from the field, from the loft. Mara's second bullet hit the post behind the man's head, sending wood splinters into his cheek. "I remember everything," she called. The man screamed, firing blind toward the barn. Smoke curled up through the broken slats. The barn caught next, a lantern tossed from a saddlebag. It shattered in the hay and bloomed flame like the devil's grin. Mara crawled backward, choking on smoke. "Eliza," Caleb shouted. "Still here," she answered. He ran to the barn's rear, found Mara climbing down, coughing, eyes red. He lifted her by the waist, set her on her feet. "Gun still good?" he asked. She nodded, wiping ash from her cheek. 2 shots left. That's 2 more than most. The last 2 men turned tail. One limped. The other dropped his gun as he fled. The scar-faced man hesitated. Blood soaked his side. Caleb leveled the rifle. The man stared back, hollow eyes, smoke behind him, dust in his throat. "You're already dead," Caleb said. The man spit blood. "So are you." Then he ran. Caleb didn't fire. By the time the flames died, the barn was half ash, half skeleton. Eliza sat on the porch, breathing hard, arm bleeding from a graze. She didn't ask for help. Amos leaned against the corral, empty flask in hand. "Thought I'd seen the last of that breed," he muttered. "You never do," Caleb said. Mara stood alone near the trough, staring at the scorched earth. One of the bodies lay nearby, his boots still smoking. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stared. In her satchel, the coded page was still folded, still dry, still dangerous. The fire was out, but Cain would smell the smoke, and next time he'd come himself. The saddle creaked once as Caleb Holt swung his leg over and settled in. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but the dust was already lifting fine, dry, rust-colored powder that clung to the leather of his coat, the lines of his neck, the corners of his eyes. He adjusted his hat, tugged the brim low. The reins lay slack in his hand. The mare breathed heavy but quiet. She knew the way too well. Behind him, the barn still smoldered. Black ribs of timber jutted skyward like the bones of something that had died standing. The girl hadn't asked where he was going. Eliza hadn't needed to. This road didn't belong to them. It belonged to the past. The wind cut low across the prairie, whispering secrets. Only men like Caleb ever seemed to hear long regrets stretched thin across wide land. He rode with one hand on the saddle horn, the other resting loosely on his thigh. His rifle was slung beside him, a second spine. Every hoofbeat stirred memory. A field in Missouri, damp with rain and buckshot. A boy no older than 16, blue-eyed and shivering, held a pistol backward as if he didn't know which end killed. Caleb hadn't hesitated. The boy hadn't bled loud. You fell. And Caleb had kept riding. He passed the riverbed near Black Ridge, where 2 years ago he'd watched a wagon burn a woman, screaming her husband's name as Cain's men laughed and rode off, sacks of flour bouncing in their saddlebags. He'd found her later, dazed, her child curled beside her in silence that said too much. He hadn't stayed to help, just left water and a pistol. Clouds gathered as he rode into the pass. Slate gray, low-hanging, too slow to bring rain, but fast enough to blot the sun. The air cooled, shadows thickened. He checked the saddlebag. Inside, the coded Bible, wrapped in oilcloth, the ledger page, a pouch of coin, one slug of whiskey, no letter, no noche. If he died, the land would bury him quiet, and he didn't want his name spoken louder than that. As the hills rose around him, the silence changed. No more birds, no wind, just the sound of hooves on gravel and the occasional groan of leather. Deadwood was still 20 miles out, and already he could feel the weight of it, the stink of ambition and rot, the way men looked at each other over cards or shoulders or barrels. It wasn't the kind of place that forgot, and he wasn't the kind of man they forgave. He passed a tree stump where he'd once seen Cain tie a man and whip him until he begged to crawl. Caleb hadn't intervened. He'd watched, then walked away. Back then, he'd told himself it wasn't his fight. But the truth was, it hadn't cost him anything. And the West taught a man fast what mattered most was cost. The mare whinnied low as he crested the final bluff before the valley. There in the distance lay the town, smoke rising, roofs angled like crooked teeth, the church steeple a spike stabbed into the sky. Caleb stopped for a moment. His hands tightened on the reins. It all felt too familiar. The kind of familiarity that didn't comfort, only haunted. Like standing in the place you'd once buried a part of yourself, and knowing the grave had been dug shallow. The town would wake soon. The gilded spur would open its doors. And Cain would smile that smile, the one that said, "I've already got a shovel for you." Caleb nudged the mare forward. Deadwood waited. The Gilded Spur Saloon opened its doors before the church bells rang. Always had. Even now, with the sun barely risen, smoke drifted out from its cracked windows, cigar, lamp oil, maybe a little gunpowder left from last week's brawl. The air smelled of whiskey, sweat, and the kind of promises that never lasted past closing. Caleb tied his mare across the street. She pawed the dust once, uneasy, as if she knew exactly whose scent still hung in the boards. He adjusted the oilskin satchel across his back. Inside, the ledger page, the coded Bible, and nothing else, not even a pistol. He walked slow, not because he wanted to, but because that's how men walked when they knew they might not come back out. Inside, the saloon was dark and damp. The lamps hadn't been trimmed. Shadows clung to corners like rats. 3 men sat at a table near the back. One of them looked up, spat a brown stream of tobacco into a tin cup, and tipped his hat, not in respect, but recognition. Cain wasn't in the main room. Caleb stood for a long moment, the smell of old wood and spilled whiskey pressing in like a blanket. Then he walked to the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his boots, slow and deliberate. Not a man in the room moved to stop him. They knew better. Upstairs, Cain's door was open. That was a message in itself. Caleb stepped through. The room was just as he remembered: high ceiling, heavy curtains drawn against the light, desk like a judge's bench, and Cain behind it sipping something clear from a crystal glass. He didn't look up. "You should have sent a letter," Cain said. "I'd have made coffee." Caleb said nothing, just walked to the center of the room and dropped the satchel on the desk. It landed with a dull, deliberate weight. Cain's fingers froze. His eyes flicked down, then back up. "You come to make demands, Holt?" Caleb shook his head. "I came to end something." Cain leaned back, smirking. "You always were sentimental." He opened the satchel. First, the ledger page. yellowed, still creased from the barn beam. Cain scanned it with practiced eyes. Then the Bible. He didn't open it, didn't need to. He knew what was inside. He poured another drink, one glass, just for himself. "You think this is enough to stop me?" he asked. Caleb finally sat down across from him, just a desk between them, same as the poker game years back. But this wasn't cards. This was confession. "I think it's enough to burn you," Caleb said, "and I ain't the only one holding copies." Cain smiled, the same slow, crooked smile he wore when he bet the girl like a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. "You threatening me, Holt?" "Number." "You asking for mercy?" "Number." "Then what is this?" Caleb leaned forward, arms on the desk. "It's your last out." Cain didn't speak, didn't move. The silence stretched. Then he picked up the page and burned it over the lamp. Held it until the ash curled in on itself. Then he looked at Caleb. "You keep the girl, you keep your land, you stay quiet. That the deal?" Caleb nodded. "And if I don't?" "You already sent your answer," Caleb said. "We buried it yesterday." Cain laughed, low, tired, the sound of a man who'd won too long, and finally met the house edge. "She's trouble, you know." Caleb said nothing. "She remembers too much." Still nothing. Cain drained the glass and set it down. "Well," he said, standing, "I'll consider this your last bluff." He walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside. The sun was climbing now, gold over the ridge. The world was still turning. "You ever think maybe the girl's not the one in danger?" he asked, still watching the street. Caleb stood. "I think if you touch her again, this town burns." They didn't shake hands. They didn't nod. They just stood there, two men with blood on their boots and too many names in their past. Caleb turned and walked out, down the stairs, across the saloon, back into the light. He didn't ride straight home. He took the long way through the cottonwood grove, past the stream that hadn't run in 3 seasons, and along the ridge where he'd once thought about putting a second house back when dreams were cheaper. He didn't look back at Deadwood. Didn't need to. He knew Cain wouldn't forget. And the West never erased its debts. Back at Pine Hollow, Mara was mending a saddle strap. Eliza was boiling water. Amos was hammering nails into new fence rails. Nothing had changed, but everything had. In the quiet that followed, the land held its breath, and somewhere a match waited to be struck. The chalk snapped in her hand. Just once, a clean break. Mara stared at it for a second, 2 halves now, like everything in her life before and after the card table. She pocketed one piece, kept writing with the other. On the board, respect is learned, so is silence. The children blinked up at her, half orphans, bastards, runaways, one boy with a burned scar behind his ear, one girl who hadn't spoken since Cheyenne. Mara didn't ask why. She never did. They were hers now, not by blood, but by bond. She taught them under the rafters of a rebuilt barn, with morning light cutting through the slats like knife blades across the floor. Outside, roosters crowed, fence posts groaned. The air was dry again. Dust in the lungs, sweat on the skin, and somewhere beyond the ridgeline, the world was still cruel. But not here. Not for now. It had been 9 years since the raid, since Caleb rode to Deadwood and came back a little older in the eyes, since Eliza bled on the porch steps, then stood up and refused to die, since the girl with coyote eyes stopped running and planted her boots in Pine Hollow dirt. Now Mara was 23. Her coat fit her. Her voice held weight. Her hands no longer trembled when the wind picked up. She was no longer a girl. Eliza baked bread in the mornings now, real bread, not the dense corn bricks they'd lived on during lean times. She added rosemary when she could find it, and the smell filled the house like something sacred. She kept the ledger still. The pages were neater, ink darker. But sometimes she stared at a blank page for minutes at a time, pen hovering over it like it wasn't paper, but memory. She didn't wear black anymore. She wore blue. Caleb spent his days at the north fence, fixing, hammering, walking the line. He didn't ride much now. His knees cracked when he did. But every night he sat under the porch awning with a tin cup and his rifle across his lap, not because he expected trouble, but because he still remembered the weight of it. He never said Cain's name, not once. But sometimes Mara caught him staring at the horizon like he still expected a shadow to rise there. And she'd feel it too, that thrum in the belly, the old fear that hadn't fully died, just gone underground. Amos came and went. He brought books when he could, always wrapped in canvas and smelling of tobacco. One of them had stories of old kings and wars, and the kids loved when Mara read it aloud, voice low, steady, each name like thunder, each fall like a whisper. "You sound like you were there," one boy once said. "I was," she answered, and maybe she had been. That spring, the creek trickled again, just a little. Caleb said it was nothing, just runoff. But Mara saved a cupful in a glass jar, set it on the windowsill, and watched it catch sunlight. A reminder that even things gone dry could remember how to run. One night, a rider came. Not fast, not loud, just one man, coat dusty, beard untrimmed. He didn't stop at the house, just left a package by the gate and turned back toward the hills. Inside, a ledger. Old, frayed, scorched in one corner, but intact. No notch. Mara stared at it for a long time, fingers pressed to the cracked spine. Then she handed it to Caleb without a word. He didn't open it, just tucked it under his arm and walked inside. Later that week, one of the girls, May, asked if they'd ever build a proper schoolhouse. Mara thought on it, then said, "We already have one." But that night, she sketched floor plans on the back of an old cattle registry with windows and a bell. She didn't show anyone, not yet. Some things had to be dreamed in silence first. A week passed, then two. The air stayed dry, but the grass came in green. One morning, Mara stood barefoot in the yard, holding a mug of cool coffee. The light hit her face, soft and gold. She looked older than 23, younger than the West allowed. She glanced east toward the hills, toward Deadwood, and thought she saw movement, not riders, just dust. But she watched it anyway. Inside, Eliza swept the floor. Caleb fixed a hinge. The children learned their letters. Amos snored on the porch. Nothing happened, but the feeling remained. Sometimes the West went quiet, not in peace, but in warning. It started with a stillness. No breeze, no bird calls, no dogs barking down by the fence line. Just a long, aching hush that settled over Pine Hollow like a held breath. Caleb stood beneath the awning, boots planted firm on dry boards. He felt it in his bones, that shift in pressure, that sudden weight in the air, like the land itself was bracing for something it wasn't sure it wanted. He looked toward the sky. Clouds, low and dark and moving slow across the ridgeline. They hadn't seen a storm in a year, but the smell was there now, that thick scent of dust, waking up, of iron, of something breaking open beneath the surface. Mara came out with her sleeves rolled and her hair pulled back, dust on her knees from morning chores. She stopped beside him, her hands empty, eyes squinting into the distance. "Could be bluffing," Caleb said, not really meaning to speak. She didn't answer, just watched the clouds like they owed her something. Maybe they did. Eliza leaned in the doorway, apron still damp from rinsing flour. She didn't smile, but there was something softer in her jaw, a quietness that hadn't always been there. Behind her, the children were reading aloud in staggered voices, vowels stretched wide, consonants dropped like pebbles in a stream. One of them laughed. That laugh floated out onto the porch and didn't feel strange. Not anymore. By noon, the light was gone, not from nightfall, but from weight. The kind of cloud that pressed down on your shoulders, made your boots feel heavier in the dirt. Amos sat by the well, hat pulled over his face, pipe dangling from cracked lips. "Storm's late," he muttered, not looking up. Caleb said nothing. That afternoon, Mara walked the fence line alone, not to mend it, just to walk it. She passed the old tree stump where they'd buried Bristle, past the place where the barn used to stand, past the spot where, years ago, she'd seen the boot print that hadn't belonged. She stopped at the rise above the south field. Look back. The house stood like it always had, wood faded, roof patched, porch rails worn slick by wind and years, smoke curled steady from the chimney. One of the younger girls was chasing chickens barefoot in the yard. Amos had dozed off again. Everything looked still, but she felt it, like a rope pulled taut inside her. Something waiting. Inside the house, Caleb ran his thumb across the edge of a tin box beneath the floorboards. Inside it, one Remington revolver, oiled, unused since the night of the raid. He didn't take it out, but he didn't put the box back either. Mara returned just before dusk. The first drop hit the porch roof like a bullet. Then another, then a pause long enough to doubt it. Then the sky opened. Rain, real rain, cold, heavy, relentless. It hit the dust like judgment. Children screamed with laughter, running barefoot into the yard, arms raised to the sky. Eliza stood at the threshold and let it soak through her sleeves. She didn't scold, didn't warn. She just stepped out into it and smiled. Mara stood alone by the paddock, her hair matted to her neck, her boots sinking in the softening earth. She tilted her face upward and closed her eyes. It didn't feel like forgiveness, but it felt like something close. Caleb stayed on the porch, hat low, water pooling around his boots. He watched it, all the kids, the woman he'd nearly lost, the girl who had once been a bet. Now a name spoken in respect. Now a story that the land itself seemed to carry. He exhaled, long, slow, like it was the first breath he'd taken in years. Later that night, the fire cracked low in the hearth. The children were asleep, bodies sprawled on floor mats, arms and legs tangled in peace. Eliza hummed an old hymn she hadn't sung in over a decade. Mara sat by the window, a journal in her lap, writing by lamplight. Outside, the rain slowed, but didn't stop. In the distance beyond the hollow, past the tree line, a rider waited beneath a slick of pine, unmoving, watching the storm washed his tracks as fast as he made them. But he wasn't in a hurry. Not yet.